people, and welcome to Reptile Fight Club. I am your host, Justin Julander, and with me tonight, the stonker-brained co-host, Rob Stone. How's it going?
Great. That's certainly something. So,
yeah, I was
all good.
Watching Aussie Herp videos, and they found a stonker-sized. I guess that's a size like big is stonker.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
But that was
Fair
applicable.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Well, back at it again with a little fight this time. We've done kind of a few of the grilling the experts and some trip recaps. So we're getting away a little bit from the fighting. So we figured we'd get back on that this time around. Yeah. How are things in Rob's world?
I suppose the only point of interest that we didn't, it actually had happened by the time we recorded the last episode, but we didn't talk about it, was Brendan Hediger, previous guest. I think it just, at the point we're recording this, right, this speaks to the timeliness or whatever of our releases, where we're at. Right. I think it just came out. He and I went down again to look for the Colorado variant of either the Western or Desert Massasauga, depending how you take it. They've been historically labeled a question mark. It's the far end of the Western population. It'd be the northern end of the desert. So it's interesting. Even going back to right and right, they're labeled as a question mark animal. Yeah. Because they have kind of features of both. The Westerns are heavier set, larger, meaning both, so weight and girth, length, than the deserts. The deserts tend to have more of that, a lighter background color, and more of that, whereas the Westerns can look more like an Eastern, I would say, especially some of those in mid-Kansas, Eastern Kansas can really look like, you can see that as opposed to being these sort of isolated pattern elements along the spine. It has more of that sort of tigerish look to it that the Easterns tend to have. So these Colorado ones are kind of betwixt and between both of those populations. So for now, at least for me being a Colorado guy, I'm counting them as a distinct unit. So still need to see Westerns and deserts. Gotcha. For non-Colorado folks, I don't know that you need to be as pedantic and maybe just pick one or the other that seems to make sense to you. But I know Brendan has seen deserts, but I don't think Westerns, counting the Colorados, is different. And I've shown them to Dustin, who's seen the deserts down in Arizona. And I had seen them once previously, right, but not found it. It was not common venture, so it didn't count for me. But yeah, so we had gone down there, and actually a couple folks from a zoo in Connecticut that Brendan knew associated with some turtle business, whatever that may have been. And so we had met them out east, and they cruised out with us, and we wound up finding 3 of them and a whole handful of prairie rattlesnakes and all that.
Oh, wow. So turtle business brings them out, huh?
I guess so.
Gotta be up to turtle business.
Turtle business.
Yeah. All right.
Maybe that's how Dustin already was on it with the desert down in Arizona. So, so it was good. It was nice. That was my 5th time in that area, probably 4th time where I thought I had a good shot. Again, one of those I had seen one, but it didn't count. So I don't know. Maybe not doing too bad. The other, at least one of the times I've seen DORs down there. So yeah, a bit of a process. And I think the bigger thing than anything is that they're pretty seasonal, particularly this Colorado population. So it's kind of a spring and fall. And if that wasn't it, well, it was going to be at least another 6 months, if not, 10, 11, before I'd have another pretty good chance to justify going down there and all that. So I was excited.
That's cool. Yeah. Congratulations. So how are they pretty isolated from the deserts and the Western? So kind of a island.
A disjunct, a disjunct population to the northwest of it, north of the, seems like the big population of deserts at this point is down by Albuquerque. And then, so obviously pretty far north from this would be northeast from there. And then the Kansas ones, it looks like you could probably get to the furthest northwest Kansas population and from Denver in 5.5, 6 hours, something like that. But the real heavy stuff is more central Kansas, southern central Kansas is what it looks like.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, they are pretty isolated. I'm just brought them up on INAT.
The old INAT.
Yeah, there's not much between. I mean, there's not, you would think they'd have some records if they were there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It seems like there probably are. Brendan was telling me that some eastern, I think it was in eastern Colorado County, there was a new county record for one.
Okay.
That kind of bridges that slightly more than it might otherwise look like. But again, that's a singular animal and stuff.
Half a state away, pretty much, from even if it's right on the border, it's still half a state away because they're about central Kansas is where they kind of kick in there. So, yeah, I mean, that's cool. Nice. So, yeah, that definitely looks like something unique, at least right now. Who knows historically what that looked like, but before kind of the last few hundred years or 10,000, let alone glacial maximum and the Pleistocene and all of that. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's certainly going back to right and right. They're marked as a question mark. Going back to the Rubio book, right? They're in there as a question mark. That's sort of the status. And that's why, as a form serper, particularly in Colorado, to me, it was okay. Well, I guess these count as something different. And I just find kind of true forms of the other things. You guys not being Colorado, I don't know how you take it. But I think what would you call it? If you don't accept it, then you have to put an appellation to that one. If that was what you found, you just don't look for that and pretend it doesn't exist, I guess.
Right.
Is the answer.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and they're listed as Tergeminus on INAT, but
they're in there as westerns.
Westerns.
Right? So, although, does it have Edward's Eye? The desert's even separated, or is this an INAT? Everything's a western. I think it is. Yeah, no designation otherwise. So, yeah, that's unfortunate, but what do you do? Right. That's how it tends to go on INAT. I don't know if they take a more. I mean, they've got the pygmy rattlesnake subspecies, so I don't know why they wouldn't have, kind of the putative Massasauga. I wonder if it is a function of sort of if you don't accept splitting them, including sort of a I don't know that there's ever been a name proffered for the Colorado animals that would put it as different that you could even assign to it. So if you're not doing it as forms, then I don't know how you split and differentiate. And so maybe they've just gone for the lumper approach on there to avoid the problem of saying, okay, then what is Colorado? Yeah, because if anything, Colorado would be its own thing. Because it does look like there is some separation between like the stuff in central New Mexico and the Arizona stuff is even almost more isolated out there. But that might just be as a result of grazing or things like that. Yeah. Modern effect. Right. Yeah. And then, the rest you could almost see kind of a contiguous range except for in central New Mexico. But is that the same kind of thing or what? It's always hard with human interruption. And even though they're isolated now, they may not have historically been isolated. So the effects on the, DNA might not be that profound, dramatic So, still, I agree with you. Forms, definitely, they look to be something unique, at least in this snapshot of our world's history. Which is all I'm going to bother to take, Right. Because, obviously there's gaps elsewhere in, different ranges and things like, especially something like the Eastern Massasauga that's been pretty much extirpated from a lot of where it probably used to be. So, it makes it tricky to say where exactly they might come from. So, yeah. Well, that's exciting. Yeah. Just working on, getting snakes feeding. All the inlands are eating well, and so I'll probably put some of those up for sale. They're looking good. And then I almost kind of want to hold on to them for a little while longer to see how they turn out, because these are the I got this really cool dark male from
the Maug line, and then I bred him to some of my AAR line females that are, the half unrelated bloodline. And so I'm kind of curious to see how they develop, and maybe holding back one or two, just taking, seeing how they develop. But really cool looking animals anyway. I'm probably holding back too many anyway. So yeah, probably need to let more go, but what do you do? I don't know. Yeah. I just got back a bunch of ball pythons that I had out on breeding loan that really weren't, doing much. And so he's like, yeah, get these out of here. I don't want them anymore. So we had sold several of the adults. And so that was kind of the last of them. And I wasn't sure I wanted to sell some of those. Like, I think there's even a world's first in there. So whatever that's worth, it's a cool looking snake. But yeah, we'll see. I don't know. I just kind of threw in some tanks. We'll feed them up and see what they do. I'm kind of on the fence whether or not I should produce anything from them, but we'll see how I feel in a month or two, I guess. But yeah.
Well, that's pretty fun.
Yeah.
A change.
Right.
A change back to the beginning, right? The mid-beginning. So.
Yeah. And I've got a bunch of caging that I'm just about ready to populate. So I'll be able to give some of my, holdbacks that are outgrowing their other caging larger, enclosures. And so that'll be good. Finally getting things moved up and into more permanent housing. And so, it's just one of those slow processes. Like I'd had these cages for a while, and I just never had the chance to get them up and going. And then like I'd start working on them. Oh crap. I don't have a cord to wire in the light or whatever. And like, so it's just one thing after another. And then I forget to pick up a cord on the way home from work or whatever. So finally I have cords and fixtures, and it's all ready to go. So I just need to knock them out, stack them up, and throw snakes in them. So that's awesome. The plan for this weekend, I suppose.
Okay.
But, yeah. So things are moving forward well. I have one egg in the incubator from the Asper still, and hopefully it hatches. We'll see. I kind of candled it a few days ago, and it looked like it was potentially moving in the right direction. So
okay, cool.
Yeah, see how it goes. But
you've hatched them before, or no? This will be
a first. Okay. Yeah. So it'd be nice to kind of tick off a species, and
they're really and talk about something that's super cool either.
Yeah, way, so. Yeah. And the female's dark, like a black one, and then the male's like a white one. So
very cool.
See what we get out of the egg. Yeah, I wish I would have caught that first clutch. That would have been nice to have a couple more eggs in there as well. But what do you do? And they can go up to like 80, 90 days, according to the literature. So we'll see. I'm about 2 months in. So could have as much as 30 days to go, or as little as, next week. We'll see. Yeah.
Well, it'll be Texas Carpet Fest for a dead cert. So
yeah, I'm very excited for. Yeah, it'll hatch out while I'm gone. I'm very excited for that. I'm looking forward to the Texas Carpet Fest. Man, there was some talk of Eric and Owen going.
Oh yeah.
I don't know how serious they are, but they seemed to be pretty. Seriously considering it, if I could get the words out. But yes, we'll see if they make it down. That'd be cool to hang out with them again.
Absolutely.
See them. So always a good hang with those two. But yeah, I mean, it is kind of a bit of a haul for them, but it's just a plane ride. I got to do the same thing. So yeah, looking forward to hanging out with Jordan and giving that talk. We'll I don't know if we need to practice or something. Maybe while we're walking around in the desert, we can practice our presentation, but it should be fun. Yeah. It was good to hear Michael Taylor on the podcast with Eric and Owen, and hearing kind of what's going on with his collection and what his interests are, and getting to know him a little bit. He's kind of the organizer of the
Fest, I thought so. Yeah. I started that one. I listened to the other ones that they had put out. Actually, I got distracted by listening to Eric has started. What's the music term for when you go back to remixing the old episode.
Yeah, that's right.
1, 2, and 3. So it was him alone, Owen, and then the first Luke episode. It was supposed to be on a certain day, and then wound up being after Tinley. They had a plan in mind, and it doesn't happen. And you're looking back, I'm thinking, part 1, they said he was going to come before, and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, I remember this. As something that I've listened to dozens of times, I'm sure, at this point. But yeah, it was fun to listen to it in that vein. And I guess Eric's trying to put up 4 of those a month, presumably.
Okay. And how did it work? He said put it in your podcast app. I was like, how do I do that? Maybe I'm too old or something. I don't know. I'm as old as he is, and he did it. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, so it needs to be a podcast player that'll support adding an RSS feed. It's not sort of publishing. It needs to be able to draw from that site.
Gotcha.
I just did it by click. If you go to that link, you can just play it within that, sort of in the vein of how you would play them on Blog Talk before.
Okay.
And that works fine. It just plays it from the browser. So
yeah, that's exciting. It'll be cool.
I just want to make sure he's a completist on this,
right?
And that there are none that he then decides to skip out on. That's my real challenge. Is no, the record is the record.
Right. Yeah.
Even now, it's weird that he's playing the intro and outro that he's utilizing now. Right. He cut out the. Yeah. And I understand why. There are a variety of reasons that go into that, and I get that, but I kind of miss it in a certain. It was never my music, but just the association. It still feels a little bit off, although I think it's the right decision. So
right, yeah. No, that's cool. It is fun to kind of go back, and I don't know if it's fun for them, but it's definitely fun for
it's fun for the rest of us.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. That history and having a permanent record where so many things are gone, like they're here today and disappear tomorrow. So it's kind of a nice thing. I don't know. I guess I was working on the Aspodides book, so I've been thinking about kind of that permanent record. And I went over to the library. I was over there for some reason, and was looking, through the Reptile section or whatever. Because I went over to my library and I hadn't given them a second edition of the Carpet book. So I finally remembered to take one over there, and I hauled the book over, and they're like, no, thank you. I'm like, what? I didn't know that was an option to say no. Like, I thought you're a library. You have books, I said, oh, like, that's weird. I donated a copy of all my previous books. Like, you don't want books? They're like, nope, we don't want any more books. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll take it back home. So it's kind of weird. Yeah. I'm like, okay. So then I'm like, well, are the books that they have going to be, so I went over and kind of checked out some of the books. They had a Chameleon book by Peter Nackis. So I was like, okay, I just scanned it in using that VScan program that Eric showed me, and, scanned in the book, and then I did the Beck book on Gila monsters and bead lizards.
Oh, cool.
So, so I've got those completely scanned into my phone now. I can read them at my leisure, I suppose. But yeah, and then got a couple new field guides. I got I haven't gotten them yet, but I've ordered them. The new Reptiles of Australia. Is it Wilson? Who is it? Yeah, Wilson and Swan. I was on the right track there without even looking. Darn it. Should have went with my gut. But the new Wilson and Swan is out and should be shipping here at the end of the month or so.
Oh, cool.
And then I noticed Brian Bush had written a new guide on Central Australia. So
interesting.
I love Central Australia, so I had to pick that one up too. And I like Brian Bush. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll see how those look, and curious to see, the new, all the new species that they've elevated since the last one. They always add, 30 to 60 or new species every time. Man, looking at that first edition copy that Nipper gave me, seeing all the how few species there were back then, it's kind of crazy.
Maybe that should be the basis of a list. It's just I'm just looking for what was just the original circa.
Right. Be much easier to accomplish, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. But that's cool. So
that is very cool.
I'd love to get back over to Australia sooner than later, but I don't know when that'll happen.
Ideas, but I think not this coming year, probably. Kind of big plans, but that takes time and money to put that together. Done. So.
Yeah. And my next target area, I'm sure, which is one of yours, is going to take a little bit of extra cash to make it out there. Yeah. So we'll see how it goes.
And I was just watching.
Yeah. Right. I was just watching a video by, I can't remember his name, but he goes by Newbies Wildlife or something like that. And
okay.
He's kind of got a calm demeanor. He's not like over the top, but showing some cool animals. And they were in Cairns area and found a
cool
jungle carpet coiled amongst the boulders of a stream bed type thing. It was pretty cool. Yeah. That's nice looking carpet. And so I don't know, just like, I got to get back there. I got to go. I guess Lucas is headed over there, so that's kind of cool.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, he'll be gone towards the end of the month. I guess it's a family trip, so not necessarily a herping trip, but he's planning on being in Brisbane and Cairns and Sydney, and was gonna like rent a car in each of those towns and get out for a day or something. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess I would be like, yeah, I'm all in for the family trip. And then I'd be like, we'll see you when we get back to California. I'm going herping. So hopefully you get some herp time over there. And yeah.
Interesting. Maybe on Sunday I'll hear about it.
Right. Yeah. We'll have to maybe have him on here and hear about it.
Yeah.
That's have a topic of like, do you go over for family trip, and do you get herping in, or do you go on a herp trip and get family time in? Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Cool, though. So at least he'll get over there, I guess, either way. So get to experience Australia. Cool.
And cool areas where you can find stuff for sure. So.
Right. Yeah. And right now it's a decent time to be there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, might be a little early for some areas, but yeah, I think South Australia, it was a little chilly.
Yeah.
In October, but when I was there, but it was
Brisbane
fine. We found plenty of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of shinglebacks. That's for sure. In South Australia in October, like no shortage of those.
I still got to see one, let alone,
let alone 40. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I guess when it rains, it pours with some things. So yeah, it was nice to have that be shinglebacks, because they're such cool lizards. Oh my goodness.
I can't even imagine the idea. Yeah. Well, and it says it all, right? That they didn't become trivial even on 40,
Yeah.
Obviously that's all the more the case when you're not finding as much other stuff or,
right,
whatever,
right.
But still.
Yeah. But still.
That speaks to it.
I mean, it was trivial for our Australian friends there. Like, what are you stopping for? It's just a shingleback. I'm like, hey, let's get this straight. I'm stopping for every shingleback. I don't care. They're too cool. Yeah. You don't appreciate what you have. I'm going to teach you a lesson and take them away. Yeah. Take them where they'll be appreciated. If only they were that easy, right?
Right.
Yeah. Cool. Well, any other things? I guess we kind of hit on it.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that jumped out to me, right, you were in terms of the context of the trying to donate the book and all that,
right?
Or even what do books look like at this point and all that. I know that Zach was on the Colubrid Corruption podcast. That was a good, enjoyable episode that just came out, and they actually got into that conversation as well. So I thought that's worth a listen. And as I say, they hit on that topic too, and sort of how the role of books versus new media, social media, all these things, getting people to, take it in, learn that information and stuff. But
right.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
And Andy has very good words Zach has very good words for you, complimentary words for you, as always. So
I'll have to listen to that one.
You'll have to listen to hear it.
Pump up the ego a little. No.
Right?
Good. Zach's a good guy. I enjoyed herping with him when we were out there in California, and riding with him and stuff. He's a good dude. I had to set the record straight a little bit because I listened to Nick on Reptile Rejects podcast, and he invoked my name in something that I disagree publicly and privately with him on regarding nidoviruses. He always goes off on how nidoviruses are a non-issue.
I did listen to this.
Yeah, and I'm like, no. I mean, there's obviously some collections that have been decimated by serpentoviruses or nidoviruses, as they used to be called. And they are definitely, we don't know that much about them, which, he mentioned, like that's a good point. But we do know that they are lethal viruses in a lot of cases. We don't know if it's their natural host. And I'll give him that. Like, yeah, when a virus infects a host, it typically doesn't want to kill the host. It just wants to use the host machinery to replicate itself. But I mean, we don't know if like these are carpet python viruses that are jumping to green trees and then they're extra
then there's a problem.
Lethal,
sure.
or vice versa. Or,
exactly.
Like with the COVID outbreak, right? We had a virus that wasn't a human virus jumping into humans and causing severe disease and a pandemic, serious.
And over the course of time, right, it's selecting to, not kill its host, but it took time to get there.
Exactly. And that's kind of how it works, especially when it enters a naive host population.
Right.
And obviously, like in the wild, like shingleback populations were crashing and dying because of a nidovirus. So there's plenty of examples, like the Murray River turtle. Was that a nido? I can't recall, but it was a related virus, if or a similar viral outbreak. So there are definitely examples where these viruses can be very deadly and can take out entire collections. We saw that with the ball python, serpentoviruses, nidoviruses. And I mean, I know people personally that have lost entire collections that were just so, beleaguered from going down and finding more dead snakes from, respiratory disease. And there was nothing that they could really do to help them. So now I get it. Like, don't go euthanize your snakes because you get a positive nido test.
If you're seeing no symptom, right? If you haven't
disease,
an animal and you're not seeing disease, then don't. I understand that aspect of it, but
at the same time, also understand that there is a possibility that nidovirus can be transmitted to another snake in your collection that might absolutely die because of that infection. So, just kind of flippantly saying it's a non-issue, stop worrying about it is not, that's not a healthy way to look at it. It's like, you need to understand that sometimes it is a problem and sometimes it is deadly and sometimes it does decimate a collection. So it is not a non-issue, Nick. I'm sorry. I will disagree with you as a virologist on this podcast.
Right. And it's one thing to say, if we're talking about babies that have had, because the non-transmission through the egg, barrier, and then associated with incubation, maintained separately, no exposure. But if you sell adult animals, even from your captive population, you're not seeing any disease. But if you sell one of those adult animals and ship it out, and as you say, it does have that disease, it just wasn't symptomatic at all in your situation. Again, either same species or a different one, it could potentially be an issue. And obviously the same would be true if you got something from someone else, that then fit into that box. So
exactly. And I mean, it's true that some viruses do evolve to infect, one or a few, limited host species, but there's definitely, examples of the opposite being true, that they will jump and they will cause more severe disease in a naive and new host population. So to say that, they're just a natural pathogen that has been around for millions of years is too simplistic and too, and frankly, kind of a dangerous attitude to have, because, whether or not he's dealt with that, I can't say, but, he may in the future, and that I'd hate for him to have to change his tune because he had something like that happen. Now, with no real treatment options, there's some ideas that are maybe coming down the pipe. But that, those can also be potentially dangerous too. The treatment could be maybe worse than the disease in some cases, but also, the fact that you can quarantine or, do work workarounds, like where you can work with sick animals last or on a different day or wear different clothes, things like that, where you're not going to be bringing that.
You're minimizing
for the
your
rest
exposure.
Yeah, exactly. And you're reducing the likelihood of passage to other animals. So knowing if you have a nido or a serpentovirus infected animal is also reasonably, good. That said, I don't think I've tested, I haven't tested my entire collection or anything like that. But if I do have any animals that have any symptoms of disease, they're isolated. They're worked with, last or on a different day. I work with, juveniles always go first and then,
right.
get to the adults and things like that. So just having that kind of workflow is very helpful and important too. So I don't know. I just throw that out there.
Well, and the other thing, it does always remind me, right, that, chondros typically have been associated with, especially moving adult chondros has sort of always had a connotation of potential risk associated with particularly respiratory infections, right? That's a long-standing thing, for the last 40 years. That's been identified as a potential, this always happens. Well, so to the point that, it's not a novel virus, but that, is that stress causing that, not new, but it's, maintained exposure to prompt symptoms of disease? Yeah. Maybe blood pipe.
Or are these species just sensitive to certain, like carpet people jump into green trees. And so the ones that are in carpet pythons that don't cause disease, maybe they cause lethal disease in a green tree python. So just because you haven't made that combination doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And it's not a real threat. Or, tell that to somebody who's lost their whole collection from nidovirus. They're not agreeing with you either. And yes, they are natural. They do occur in nature, but they also cause lethal disease in nature, as evidenced by that shingleback.
The shinglebacks,
Yeah. So it's not just a cut and dry, like nidoviruses are a non-issue or they're the worst thing in the world. Like obviously there's gradations and there's lots of different nidovirus strains. There's unique strains in lots of different species, which, if you have a mixed species collection, all the more reason to consider that, because if they're close, if a green tree python and a carpet python can have a viable offspring, they might be able to share a nidovirus infection as well. So I wouldn't take what Nick said as gospel truth there for sure. He's right on some aspects of it, but he's dead wrong on others. And I would hate for your snakes to be dead wrong because you listen to Nick and consider it a not issue. Be aware of virus infection and take necessary precautions. Quarantine, isolation, workflow, those are all important things. So
sure.
And I've dealt with some kind of infection in the past where I got some animals from a trusted breeder and I had animals that died like within a week of being exposed and getting the disease. So I've dealt with this and it's not fun. And it's, it definitely demoralizes you, but it also, wakes you up to the fact that these things can be an issue. So knock it off, Nick. quit preaching the wrong information. Cause nidoviruses, serpentoviruses are important pathogens of captive collections. So
at a minimum to be aware of and sort of engage with appropriately.
Right. So. And, Nick doesn't listen to podcasts, so he won't hear this for sure. All right. Oh, and I mentioned this on Carpets and Coffee, but there was I talked to Nick the other day and I said, "Oh, I heard you were dead." Like there was some other podcast that like, I think some AI generated statement said that Nick Mutton had died. I think it was Eric or Owen was like, is Nick okay? Or, and Lucas is like, yeah, I just talked to him yesterday. Like he's fine. Some podcast was saying he's dead. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of a weird deal.
There you go.
So,
okay.
Nick Mutton is alive. I did chat with him, and the rumors of his death are
greatly exaggerated.
Greatly exaggerated. Yeah. So, all right. Well, sorry, Nick, I had to disagree with you there. even though you're not listening. So
he could come fight. He could come fight about it if he.
There you go. Yeah, come fight me if you disagree with what I'm saying. All right. Well, should we get into our topic?
Sure.
Tonight we're going to talk about, I guess, the extent or should we expose our captive reptiles to tough times? Nature is pretty brutal, and I think we tend in captivity to go the opposite direction and baby our stuff, and sometimes to their detriment. So we're kind of going to discuss, I guess, the pros and cons of exposing your animals to hard times, So I guess we'll kind of define that and as we go and talk about some of the aspects of this topic. As always, if you have further thoughts or, a different perspective on this, give us a holler and come on and fight out your ideas. It'd be good to have you on. So, all right. Well, we'll go ahead and flip the coin to see which side we take here. So go ahead and call it.
I'll go with heads.
It is tails.
Tails.
Yeah.
Here I tried to be different from my normal predilection. And what did it get me?
Yeah, always go with your gut. I guess if you do the same thing, you're going to be right half the time.
On average, half the
time. Yeah. That's not to say we can't get 10 in a row of one or the other, but all right. Well, I will go with the pro side of giving hard times to your reptiles.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, that's all we need to do because it's just us.
Cool.
I'm used to the double coin flip with a guest. So,
right.
Yeah. All right. Well, why don't you go ahead and start us out?
Sure. Yeah. So, I think just to kind of frame, cabin the topic, the way I was thinking of it, right, is essentially it's really a question of what is our duty to these animals, right? That's frequently framed as essentially that we need to, quote, do the best that we can, right? And obviously there are multiple different angles you can play with in there. In the case of, and I think that's kind of born of our care for domesticated animals, right? Where our obligations and the standards and the minimum standards and what good care looks like is really well defined. So the question, speaking of Nick, right? Because I know frequently either he has mentioned or then, kind of people taking in that mindset have mentioned, oh, well, these snakes are becoming domesticated. So, well, what is this sort of classical definition of domestication? And the answer, generally speaking, for the domestication of animals is 10 or more generations. So when we're talking about Alterna, or our Australian pythons, some of them might be getting close to that. Chondros, some of them might be getting close. Leopard geckos, a certain lineage is absolutely, and that might even be many or most of them, right? Save for the ones that came in more recently as defined specific species and subspecies and things.
All pythons, obviously, when you're
driven
by a morph, you're turning over and holding back offspring, to get the latest morph. So you're obviously going through generations pretty quickly because you're, moving on to the next one as quickly as possible to keep ahead of the curve or whatever.
Yeah. So it seems like the framework for things that are sub 10 generations are somewhere between wild and what's considered tame animals. And I would say for the most part, with those few exceptions, some lineages, a particular animal of ball python, probably most pet store leopard geckos, probably most bearded dragons, in captivity in the United States, those might be domesticated, but otherwise we're probably talking about either wild, and that, actual wild animals, the first, second generation, or tame, kind of in that window in between. It's not as clearly established what the threshold for good care is, right? And is much more variable. The cats and dogs are very similar to one another with a couple captive care differences, but those things are pretty well established. Same thing with all the domesticated livestock. But if we're talking about, the proper care of a bearded dragon versus a ball python, that does look quite different. So obviously there just isn't the standardization, right? Just kind of putting that out there. So,
one enjoys hammocks, one does not.
One does not. Absolutely, or at least less so. It is funny whenever you go to the zoos and see all the ball pythons that have shoved themselves up into the corners of their enclosure. That I've seen, multiple places, which is interesting, right? For sure. So, that being said, I guess it's, again, we're in a more nebulous space. If we're framing it as doing the best that we can, well, what does that mean? And for the most part, people, as you said, take it as a state of abundance. Well, we know that the wild condition can be feast and fallow, right? For sure. Yeah. So I think that's really, I'm just trying to define even what we're talking about here. Yeah. And as long as those kind of frameworks, make sense to you, then I think we're fine with that as a starting point. And yeah, I
agree with the, kind of the domestication approach and looking at it from that aspect, because that also includes, a feeding regimen, where they're more likely to take, commonly produced prey species like, lab mice and rats, or crickets, or mealworms, or, kind of that limited number of food items. And then, they're going to take that right out of the egg kind
more
of
readily,
idea.
With less inputs. Yeah.
Like a hognose snake doesn't even know, captive bred several generations, doesn't even know what a toad smells like anymore. Like they might recognize it as food, but they might not also. So, it's hard to say. But so we've taken some of these species far away from what they naturally, and I'm not saying that, that's hard times versus easy times, but if they're used to eating toads and you're changing it to a rodent diet, are you giving them,
the nutritional value
what they've evolved to eat, And I mean, man, they went to a great extent to be able to eat a poisonous toad and not die, capitalize on that rarely eaten food item, at least wholly eaten. Some animals have found out if you flip them over and eat them, their belly, it's okay. But yeah, so I think we may be doing them a disservice, but keeping a ready supply of toads, without collecting from the wild or introducing parasites or things like that can also be challenging. So, and I guess maybe that brings up kind of something I've kind of kicked around over the years is like, that idea of parasites and natural cycles, in animals. And you see, like in nature, they can have a pretty good sized parasite load that really doesn't affect them too much unless they get, overly stressed through, extreme hunger or, things like that. And then maybe that does them in quicker or something. I don't know. It's hard to say. Like they go out quickly or something because the parasite load takes over if they reach a certain point. So who's to say if that's, if they live with that in the wild, who's to say if that's good or bad? I guess maybe that's our concept of like, okay, I wouldn't want a parasite on me, so I'm sure they don't want the parasite on them, but maybe there's something that we're not considering or not factoring in or whatever. And, just kind of thought that went through my head. I don't know how to model that in captivity, if that should be a thing, like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I was listening to Chris Montrose on the Expert and the Idiot podcast, I believe. I think that was relatively new, or I was coming to it recently. Mm-hmm. And basically the discourse around how much, essentially what the paradigm should be in terms of when you incorporate wild animals into your collection, what that looks like. Do we heavily dose them for parasites, or are we going to kind of to the extent that the cycle requires an intermediate step that is broken inherently in captivity? Is there a utility to not treating those things and letting that cycle naturally break, maintaining the gut biota and things, instead of just pumping them full of panicure and killing everything that's in there and kind of starting that cycle? So just as you're talking through that with the parasite context, and that's always, to be honest, been my more or less approach, to the extent that it can, that it's viable, right? That they actually, you can break the cycle. It's not it hasn't been a goal of, well, I'd like them to always have it so that it's but rather to say, okay, can we be minimally invasive and just sort of focus on the reducing stress and getting them feeding rather than nuking their system, right?
Right. So, Well, and there are some examples of where treatment of parasites causes them to go into I don't know, panic mode or whatever, and kind of conglomerate and plug up the system and cause the animal's death. So then it's like, oh, they just had too many parasites. Well, was it because of the parasites or because you treated them for parasites that caused that, or or overdosing them with the Panicure or something like that? Those kind of things happen as well. So it's not as simple as like parasites good, parasites bad, treat them all or whatever. So it's hard to say, but
toxic. Hasn't there been instances of almost like a septicemia or a toxic shock associated with them having a large load? I'm thinking either intestinal worm, something like that.
Yep. Like hookworms
the volume of dead, organic material caught inside their body cavity, then causing issues.
Right. And I guess for those not familiar, some of these internal, intestinal parasites have a multi-species life cycle where, when they hatch out of their eggs, they go into a fish, and then, a bear eats the fish, and then the bear replicates them to the next stage, and then they poop out the eggs or whatever, and then a human gets exposed, and so it's kind of like some of these are, you look into it, it's really kind of a cool thing, some of these parasitic worm or I guess internal parasite life cycles that involve multiple species. It's really intriguing and really kind of a crazy thing.
Kind of gross.
Yeah. How did that happen? But it makes sense in how they're passed and things, but really kind of cool. I think too, like in regards to the food, I think just the idea that most, we're kind of python guys. So most pythons, don't just have a regular year-round feeding cycle.
Sure.
They have long periods of no feed, and then sometimes where they're eating very frequently. So, do we if they're getting, say, 100 meals a year, are we feeding 80 meals in 1 month, and then the 20 throughout the rest of the year, like they might see in the wild? Or are we spacing that out, with like a weekly, or I guess that would be a bi-weekly feeding, maybe 50 meals. Let's make it easy. A weekly feeding, that kind of thing. And, frankly, like, I think either way can work, but what's better for the animal? What's more natural? What might promote more naturalistic behaviors or promote, reproduction like it occurs in the wild? And maybe we don't know everything, right? So maybe we're making a lot of assumptions, but I would think that kind of seasonal or cycle feeding might have some other advantages, like stimulation of reproduction, or, another trigger for that reproduction, in addition to like changes in temperature or light cycle or moisture, whatever. So I don't know, there can be some advantages to following that more, I guess, difficult from our point of view on the animals. Like we think, oh, they can't go for a month without eating. That's inhumane, but that's kind of taking that, of course we couldn't do that. Yeah. Anthropomorphic view of, we couldn't do that, so they shouldn't have to do that. But if that's how they evolved to live and to, so I don't know, understanding the natural things. I mean, that was a big, I guess, impetus for writing the Green Tree Python book, was because there was that misunderstanding of what these animals were doing in the wild and how infrequently they eat in the wild, and how infrequent the rodents in Cape York produce. It's kind of an interesting thing. I was able to find like a paper on the different rodent species in the Iron Range, and they really didn't have a very high fecundity. Like they were doing these trapping surveys of rodents in Iron Range, and they just weren't finding a lot, especially during certain times of the year. So I imagine these snakes are going for months without feeding, but then in captivity, we're feeding them and they're getting to be 6 foot beasts, like weighing a couple thousand grams, but in the wild, they rarely exceed maybe 500, 600 grams. And that's a monster in the wild. So, do we want to try to get them up to 3,000 grams and have them producing 60 eggs where half of them are slugs or, that kind of thing. So I think there are some definite things to consider in that regard, where following a more natural cycle, which would kind of go to their evolution and, what they're used to, that in evolutionary terms, and might make them a longer lived, healthier animal in the long run. If we're, I guess, in our anthropomorphic view, being mean and giving them, limited food during most of the year, but feeding them very heavily in a certain, period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot there. The couple things that jump out to me, the first thing, right, is recognizing the question of, does this align with their natural conditions? Right. So those aren't necessarily the same for a lizard versus a python versus a boa versus a colubrid. So I think it was Zach again. It was probably on colubrid, or it was that same colubrid corruption. I don't know. At some point, he says so many podcasts, saying so many intriguing things. But there was a discussion essentially that how we talk about python internal organs changing so dramatically based on the process of ingesting and digesting food, that whatever the conversation was, it was highlighting that boas are not even as extreme, if at all, as pythons, despite both being boids, that it would not be, it's actually not exactly the same. It's not exactly parallel there, right? So that if we're talking in this context of saying, oh, I'm modeling their natural conditions, and in that case, we do, if you're talking about a python that has sort of up and down regulation of all their internal organs associated with ingesting and digesting prey, you're actually doing them no favors by just causing that to be continually switched on, over the course of the year with weekly feeding. You're not doing them any favors for sure. But if it's a colubrid that definitely doesn't have that same scale at a minimum of up and down regulation, that not feeding them on that frequency, might actually represent the distinction from the natural condition. So we just need to be careful that we're actually applying it appropriately, defining that. And I think, to me, on it, you had raised this topic, and I think the hard part is just making sure it's actions with information and intentionality, and just making sure that there is actually alignment, so that we're talking about what's the distinction between neglect and a conscious and a choice that reflects their actual natural condition. It probably is that it's a conscious choice, and that there's alignment with other features. So that if we're talking about it, seasonal feeding, burst feeding associated with these conditions, then when you're not feeding them is in alignment with when you're also lowering the temperatures, potentially lowering the humidity, that all of those factors are in alignment. That suggests that conscious decision, conscious choice to be operating in this way, as opposed to, I just didn't pay attention to them for 2 weeks, or I was prioritizing other things, or whatever it was. So
and I think to that point, I agree that with the pythons and but I'm Gavin Bedford did some research where he found that wasn't really triggered, at least in whatever species, I think it was olive pythons or something he was looking at. It didn't trigger that increase in organ size if it was under 20% of the animal's weight, so smaller meals.
Even more complicated, right?
Right. Or maybe if you feed, 5 smaller meals, that equals 1 larger meal. So it would increase it, I don't know that he did all those.
Of the entire
exactly.
Bolus, or is it?
Yeah. Do you let each small food of bolus get digested completely before you offer another one? Or are you offering, 5 in a week and then doing the same thing as you would be?
Someone feeding,
is it good to ramp up, for a month or two, versus the whole year? Is it good to have that and then have it not be there, I
would suggest my own personal predilection is yes. That is actually, and would align with sort of how I do it, right? Is that I do think that ramp up and ramp down is far preferable to, particularly when it's up, then you feed the heck out of them, and then you let them down regulate, and there's feast and fallow, right? We know that for many species, that is a natural condition, particularly island boa. Again, even if there is a distinction in the upregulation, downregulation from boas and pythons, there's still, like, we know in those Caribbean boa constrictors, right? There's 2 times a year where there are prey animals appropriate size.
They're available. And the rest of the year there is not.
There is not.
So, there's plenty of examples of that too. Those the tiger snakes, it Channel Island or where they eat those nestling birds, and that's about all they eat for the rest of the year. So they've got to get their meals in, and there's those examples of the cottonmouths that are like the size of tires because they sit under the bird rookeries and just eat. They're just covered with bird crap and they're fat as a tire because they eat fledgling birds that fall out of the nest all day. So, there's some that, and I mean, obviously pythons are meant to be sedentary ambush predators that don't necessarily move a lot, or, depending on the species that's more or less so. But, in general, these ambush type predators are used to going long periods of time without food, and to give them regular food very often is probably not going to be beneficial to the animal's long-term health. So unless maybe these changes are occurring as we domesticate them, maybe, and obviously that's a part of domestication where they're, breeding in off season. So their seasonality is being reduced and going away, versus, keeping that seasonality, are you, hampering domestication if you're giving them those more natural, things? And also, varying temperature. Like, I think if I can jump to kind of a next topic, when we were cruising around in the northern Queensland, and it was, 70 degrees, rainy, kind of miserable, almost cold compared to what we were used to, where it's fairly warm over there. And it was, maybe even high 60s. And we're just like, oh, we're not going to find any snakes. And then there's a jungle carpet python crossing the road, feisty as ever and doing just fine at, that 70 degrees. And I think, all the jungle, all 2 or 3 of the jungle carpet pythons I've seen in the wild have been kind of on that more misty, rainy, cold nights, versus hot. It seems like more reptiles prefer that kind of, and are we, again, hampering our animals' health and longevity by giving them a constant 80 to 85 degrees their whole life? Should they be given 60s and, even maybe 50s for some species, temperatures, certain times of the year or overnight or whatever, seasonally? Obviously that can have a huge impact on like a diamond python. If you don't provide them with that cool temperatures, they're going to have, shortened lifespans. They'll die much earlier. And if you treat them like a regular carpet python, a jungle carpet python or something, they're not going to live very long. You're going to have problems doing that. So I think that's another example of how being beneficial that can be to kind of keep them under those wild circumstances.
Question for you, relative, because it's, and I'm not even sure where I would have first heard this, but it certainly sort of maybe falls into the category of conventional herp wisdom or unconventional. I don't even know herp wisdom at this point, right? Do you think thermal capacity or thermal plasticity within an animal, is that akin to a muscle where their capacity to handle that change could atrophy if you kept them at the 78 to 82, and then something that otherwise would have their species would have been, normally they're able to tolerate temperatures down into the 60s, but in an animal that's never exposed to that, is that a capacity that atrophies, or is that something that's going to be retained even regardless of how it's being maintained? Like, would that animal potentially get sick, if it spends the first 10 years, we'll call it, of its life in the collection of someone who keeps 78 to 82, and it's a species that normally has the capacity to go from 60 to 90, let's say, but hasn't been maintained that way its entire life, has spent its lifetime sort of living within that optimum condition. Does it retain the capacity to do that, or is it vulnerable to potentially get sick if then it's exposed to what its normal condition would normally have allowed?
Right. And I guess, defining, what sick would be, is it just
pick up the sniffles, or, that was always the framing, was like, it makes them, that's why I say atrophy, right? Because it's almost like their capacity to handle it has diminished based on the way they've been maintained.
And say it, stresses them, physiologically. So then bacteria might have an opportunity to colonize areas that they normally wouldn't, because if the animal's healthy. Yeah. I mean, I think that could definitely be a factor. I don't know. I'm trying to think of examples of if that's been demonstrated, but I mean, if you've experienced that, where you've seen those wild swings through your whole existence, you're probably able to handle that a lot better than, exactly. Whereas if you all of a sudden have had this, comfortable, consistent living, and then all of a sudden you're exposed to that harshness. I worry about myself. Like, if, I'm used to air conditioned home or a heated home, and then I have to live out in a tent for a year or something, like if I'd survive that, or if I'd want to survive that, I think we've gotten softer for sure over the generations. So are we doing that same thing to our animals or not? That's a really good question. Good thought.
Yeah. I don't know.
And does it benefit them to give them a wider range?
Right. Are you making them more, are you encouraging that hardiness? Again, we've seen the context of, the different variables that can happen. I was just thinking of when the power went out for 24 hours in my house, when it was single degree day in December, and the Caribbean boas and things were, so it got down into, I did have the little room heater, vented room heater situation to try and maintain some temperature to it, but they probably at least had some exposure into the mid to low 50s, and power came back on, and within whatever it was, half hour, 45 minutes, they were all hanging ready to be fed.
Right. Yeah.
Even though it was, still in the upper 50s.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's reports of, green tree pythons being, at higher elevations in New Guinea or carpet pythons in Australia that are out at near freezing temperatures, and either they got caught, out when it dropped and they just didn't have the energy or mental capacity to find their way home, or, whatever. But it seems like I guess you can see that in animals that have evolved to live in a consistent, 70 to 80 degrees their whole life. And then you put them in a situation where the temperature falls, they don't know what to do. They'll just stay out and die, like they don't know what cold is, basically, and if we could do that to our, animals over time
in reverse, right?
Yeah,
where
exactly.
They wouldn't have that capacity, but lose it.
But
we've
lost
the way
it.
Been maintained.
Yeah, and I imagine if they can change, so much dietarily and otherwise, I think that's a reasonable assumption to make, that we can kind of weaken them that way over time, as well as through the domestication process. That's the way you look at it. Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
Right, and the other part of that too is maybe some of what gives them that capacity to be plastic, right, in terms of what they can handle in the wild, is then that they're actually outside getting UV exposed. Not only is it it's sort of what does it actually look like on the warm up. So even if we then do warm them up, it's not warming. Maybe it's not carrying all those multi-factor, benefits that allow them to make it through. So yet another complication.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, too, like, is that UV exposure seasonal as well? Because Man, in Central Australia, it gets, as soon as that sun is up, it is hot. There's no Brettles out basking, but in the winter, absolutely they're out basking, trying to get to that,
And what does that look like? How is that moderated by cloud cover? What's the variance on that? Do we even have the capacity at this point to replicate? That's so many questions, right?
Yeah,
and it brings us back to the question I know we've asked before, where it's like, is it better to to try and fail and think you're doing something, but actually be falling short than it is to not try at all, in the context of, I'm providing UV and I'm doing it this, sure, but you're providing too much or in the wrong manner, or it doesn't actually work. All these things. Is that better than not providing? Probably, but it's
hard to say.
Still imperfect.
Because, I think too, we've come across some, husbandry regimens that have been almost like an emergency room, where like with the green tree pythons, where they came over on a boat, and by the time they got here, they were just so terrible. Like you had to keep them over water just to, keep them hydrated. But do we need to do that now with our captive bred offspring or animals that are flown over within a couple weeks of being collected?
Right.
Probably not. They're probably don't need that. That husbandry style is probably just akin to like, a baby's born, hurry quick, get it to the ICU. Well, does it need the ICU, or, does it have a condition that requires treatment in the ICU, or, are you just being overprotective or worried, or just following a care guide because that's what it told you to do, and you're not thinking those things through critically. That's, I guess it's hard because you like the animals, you pay good money for the animals in many cases, especially these days. Even the imports are like a couple $1,000s. It's pretty insane for depending on the species. But then, you pay a lot of money to outfit it and to put it in an enclosure. Are you going to, give it the tough love or whatever? Or are you going to try to baby that thing to keep it as happy as possible so it will produce babies for you in the future? That's kind of I think that what that mindset is up against is like, we should give them what they experience in the wild, unless it could potentially, do anything to harm them. So I think we've kind of moved, the pendulum has swung to that side of it, where we're babying them and keeping them at ideal all the time and giving them as much food as their heart desires. And then we wind up with these slug bearded dragons that are way overweight, can't even hardly walk, their bellies are dragging on the floor. And then we're thinking, oh, this is a happy pet bearded dragon, So I think that's the extreme version, of course, but what I mean.
For sure. And do you have the experience, confidence, resilience, where if you do then put up your kind of tough love enclosure on social media and you get, people that are in
harassed,
the soft camp, you're getting harassed for, doing it wrong or whatever by people that are falling into, they need their hammocks, they need to be overweight, overweight looks good, that sort of idea, that cultural.
That's what everybody's used to,
Right. Do you have the capacity to stand up, against that, even just confidence within yourself and what you're doing to sort of resist that? Is that a challenge for new keepers? We know that it is, right? And it's not a social media thing. Even we saw it on the forums. That was a classic forum problem of a new keeper who's excited, and the folks, whomever it might be, telling them how they're doing it wrong. That's cool.
They're just excited about their doll furniture and their enclosure, and
what, it's just enrichment, you like to sit at the tea party. What are you talking about?
Yeah, Fluffy likes it.
Well, it's a new smell that might smell like your guinea pig also, maybe it does. Yeah.
Right. You never know. And, there's a lot of different ways that people have successfully kept reptiles, and sometimes I always use this as an example. And, I saw a talk about Boelen's pythons, and it showed them in the wild and how they use this giant garbage pile of their shed skins and feces and old plants. And they make a nest in there, and that's where they spend most of their time, the females, and then they show their cage and it's pristine white. If any poop gets in the cage, they hurry and clean it off. And it's like, did you not just see where they came from and what they want and what they're used to? Are you freaking that thing out because every time it takes a dump, it's like bleach smell for the next week? Like, come on, get. I think sometimes we can overdo it. And then I've heard of people just like throwing new shaving, like Homer Simpson style, putting new newspaper over the soiled newspaper. Yeah. And the snakes have tunnels under through their, old rotten, bedding or whatever.
Pretty gnarly.
But they do great. They produce offspring. Some of these difficult to breed species are all of a sudden producing offspring, and like, well, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just kind of letting them do. I don't know. It's hard to say if that's
right.
What is beneficial? Do they like their own smell? Do they like to have like a home base? Like, this is where I feel comfortable. I have my own smell here. Or every time they soil the cage or they're on newspaper or something they're not used to,
Sure.
Substrate could be another thing. Like, is this naturalistic for them or what they're used to or what makes them feel, and even secure.
Then it's getting it right though. Right. So it's not, because it's newspaper versus a particulate substrate doesn't mean it's the right particulate. Right?
Exactly.
It's been an issue for a long time.
For sure.
Oh, does it live on fine grained sand? Is it a Cerastes that shuffles down into the sand?
Is it a sand dune or
geckos? It's that's probably more of a rock, dirt, sand mixture.
Right. Yeah. Or like the Pilbara, some of those geckos in the Pilbara where it's just like rock, pebble substrate. And also, like the microflora of where they come from. I always got a kick out of that one. Yeah, exactly. What's yogurt going to do for a snake? Is it even bacteria that can colonize the gut of a snake? That kind of thing. So, and I mean, a lot of juvenile reptiles will eat the feces of the adults. Tortoises are notorious for that. Chuckwallas are different. Yeah, especially if they are, herbivorous, then they need the bacteria and the gut microflora to help digestion. So those kind of things, if you're again cleaning too quickly and the poor babies can't get those needed bacterial fecal pellets, then I remember my first one of my first pets was a desert tortoise, and that thing would always eat its feces. Like, it was like, stop eating your poop. I didn't notice but I mean, like some, like rabbits are coprophagic where they'll eat their feces, up to a certain number of times to get the nutrients from each subsequent passage through the intestinal system. Like the first pass, they don't get much out of it.
They don't have that built-in structure, so they need to eat it again.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is a real crappy way to live, but pun intended.
I almost had him eating dog food.
You can sit there eating can after can of dog food until your tears smell like dog food. I mean, there's so many aspects of how things change when we bring things into a cube, and I mean, sunshine is not, replicated in a UV tube or, any complex lighting system, taking your animal out into the sun for half an hour a day. But that can also result in their death if you're not paying attention and you just leave them out in the blazing sun and there's no shade. So, the sun can kill as quickly as it can benefit an animal, same potentially with a UV tube, maybe over a longer period of time, but they can also be damaging to the eyes and things. So we don't just want to have a plug and play necessarily for everything. You need to pay attention and, educate yourself, understand why you're using a UV tube or, what you're trying to replicate. And I mean,
and do you have a meter? So you're checking what's the quality control on the product? Does it, or even was it a bad bat? If you're there's so many externalities.
Could be putting out nothing. It could be doing no benefit for your animal.
Or it could be the wrong,
or it could be too high. Exactly. Yeah. The maybe the cheaper UV tubes from, might be detrimental. Yeah. So
it actually actively is killing your animal.
Right.
I'm spending that. Well, sure, but you didn't spend enough. You spent more, but not enough. You're the worst.
Exactly. Yeah. I was thinking about that the other day. I was assist feeding some pygmy pythons and while they were, so I would kind of put the little mouse leg in their mouth and then they eat it the rest of the way, but they just don't want to take that first step. So I was taking them and then I would take them outside and just kind of put them in the sunlight while they were finishing their food, sure. Give them a little UV while they were eating their meal. And I thought, I wonder if this would be stimulating, where they're, hey, I'm associating this feeling of happy UV vibes with eating rodents. I don't know. It didn't work. They didn't.
So long as the hawk doesn't fly over and cast a shadow causing it to.
Yeah, but you can definitely see a change, especially in like lizards. Yeah, when you take them out into natural sunlight versus in their cage with just a heat bulb or a UV tube. Yeah, there's night and day differences. And I learned the hard way when I was a kid. I had a tegu and I took it outside and then like about 5 minutes into its bask, it like decided to take off, and they are fast animals. And so I'm chasing full speed behind this thing. And luckily it was headed right for my grandparents' house next door. So it had to turn right or left. And so I'm like, well, I can cut it off at the turn if I pick the right direction. And I picked left and it went left. So I was able to catch it before it got into like this big evergreen bush thing that I would have never gotten it out of. So yeah, that was kind of scary. I'm like, okay, note to self, don't take it out and just let it sit on the lawn.
Keep it on the leash when I take
it outside. Put the hammock where it will want to run to the hammock. But yeah, I don't know. I guess there's a lot of ways you can do it. But I think consider at least, I would just encourage like knowing about their natural history. Like I guess I'm so interested in that, that I just can't fathom somebody getting an animal, not knowing where it comes from, not knowing what it does in the wild or what it, kind of habitat it comes from. Maybe we don't know for something, but this day and age, it seems like we know for pretty much anything. You can even get on iNaturalist and find plants and, insects and mammals that are around it that have been found near to their area. I really like, oh my gosh. Why do I always try to say names before I think of the name? Roy Blodgett, Roy Arthur Blodgett, and talk, how he is trying to get plants and feeders and, all sorts of things from the same place where the snakes come from, so co-housing them with different lizard species that come from their natural range. It's really a cool thing. And I really, I like that thought process. Who knows if that's beneficial to the animals or not. I can't see that it would be harmful, like they probably appreciate that effort, but kind of a cool concept to try to match what they would experience in the wild. I love seeing that at zoos too, multi-species enclosures really cool. Where they've done the research instead of just like, oh, they both come from Africa, stick them in the same enclosure, that you see sometimes. But yeah, when it's really thought out and they've taken that natural history into consideration, or may have even seen them in the wild, seen them in the same habitat together, I'm like, hey, let's put these two together in an exhibit. That's pretty cool. So
yeah, I mean, well, there is a real complexity. I suppose, it's not even a contrary side, because I agree with you that's really cool. The key condition to make sure you're, not having deleterious effects is just saying, your example with the Agurnia, right? What is it? Signitos and Epsolus, where it's like, those are from the, very similar habitat at a similar area at a minimum. But when they were maintained that way, they were operating completely differently, and it wasn't to the benefit of either, right? When they were being maintained simultaneously in the same enclosure.
Yeah, you definitely have to keep those kind of things in mind, that some things don't mix, and just
even if
because
they seem like they should, or just they're both from rock habitat in WA, doesn't mean it's going to work.
Yeah, exactly. Or, maybe the cage was too small. Maybe it would have worked if you had them, on separate ends of a room or something. Yeah. And, obviously that all kind of plays into it, the size of the enclosure and things like that, lots of things to consider, lots of things that you can do to improve the outcome or the beneficial environment of your captive animals.
Again, conscious choices, I think, is really the aspect that I would come down most from. Right. Does what you're doing reflect a conscious choice that align? Is it a bunch of aligned variables that you're trying, where you're accepting and responding to the feedback that you're getting from the animals in the system, or is it just neglect? That's the question, right? Yeah,
that's true. I do like the term. I think either Terry Phillip or Ryan Young or somebody came up with the calculated neglect, where you're doing it for a reason. Sure. You're not neglecting them because you don't have money to feed them or something. You're doing it because they don't eat during this month in the wild or something, or during this season in the wild.
And that can then make a good choice for you as a particular. I actually want to work with this because that fits naturally into my availability or seasonality or whatever it is, right? That's great. Again, why we should be keeping what works best for us instead of all trying to keep this contiguous monoculture. It's like, no, there's a thing that'll work best for you and what you can provide. And then just be responsive to that. Don't just say, nope, I agree that I'm never feeding in November, regardless of the temperature, or regardless how they're responding, regardless of their body condition, whatever it is. So
there's another kind of cool example of temperature regimen and things like that. They tuatars were thought to die if they got over 70 degrees, and that kind of thing. And so, a zoo was keeping them constantly, under 70 degrees. And if it got, over 70, then they would turn on the cooler and, and mist them or something, like cool them
freeze them down.
Exactly. And they just were not growing much. They weren't reproducing or anything like that. And so they thought, well, let's see what they're doing in the wild. Let's watch, and they saw them out basking at, 90 degrees or whatever. And they're like, oh, so sometimes they can do that and they're not going to die, and then they actually set up a system where the sensors would replicate, what the exact temperatures that were happening in New Zealand, in a given area where tuatars are found. And so, and then, they set up basking and skylights and stuff. And all of a sudden the animals are coming out going, thank goodness we can finally bask. We've been in this, frigid wasteland for way too long, So I think, if we go with conventional wisdom, sometimes that can also be dangerous because, somebody had a tuatara die because it got too hot,
but it doesn't mean that sure.
Exactly.
Or were there compounding factors to that as well?
Exactly. And I think a lot of times we have those kind of herpetoculture, conventional wisdom that just doesn't match reality. Monitors were that way, right? You couldn't have a monitor.
Get them over 100,
Exactly. Yeah. And then Frank came along and said,
was the Frank dynamic.
Blast them 150 and they're fine. You just have to give them the option to get out of that 150 and they're no problem at all. Yeah.
It was also the mechanism of heat delivery, right? Obviously, 150 degree hot rock, that's a huge problem. 150 degree, spot, flood that doesn't have a pinpoint, that's completely refracted. Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, or several lights that give a broad basking area. Yeah. Lots of things to consider. But I think this is a big plug for learning about the reptiles you keep, learn about their natural history, find out where they come from, go visit that place, just experience it, see what they're doing in certain times of the year if you can. It makes it just more rewarding, in my opinion. Not that you have to. I mean, maybe we're hampering their domestication by trying to keep them more
feeding into these proclivities.
Yeah, we should make them be at 80 to 75 to 85 degrees their whole life, and give them this pampered weekly feeding. They can reproduce all months of the year. No big deal. Yeah. So I don't know. I guess it could go either way.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of these topics, right? There's no one right answer. We're not
especially
dogmatic.
This one, because I think fundamentally it's sort of like in the course of the conversation, have established sort of a major terminal endpoints on either end of the direction.
Right.
And it's like, okay, if you're in here and it's a conscious choice, there's so much flexibility in terms
wiggle
of
room.
what works for your animals in your space. So.
Yeah. And you too. I mean, this is not entirely, I mean, it is about the animals, but it's also about our enjoyment of the animals. Why would we have them if we didn't enjoy them or want to experience them in the captive setting? And so if that means you want to give them a hammock, and that's your prerogative, I don't know that it's going to necessarily be non-beneficial to the animal. It might look horrible to people who enjoy naturalistic settings, but hey, it's not about us. It's about you and your animal and your enjoyment of that animal and their enjoyment of their captive
right. So
conditions.
Long as there's not a risk, when I think of the hammock thing, I'm going, okay, well, as long as they're not getting their nails aren't too long because the substrate's improper, so they're not being properly worn down, and they're catching in the hammock and it rips off a finger or whatever it might, that sort of thing. Like, yes, as long as those aren't a problem, then absolutely have your hammock.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody's going to shame you here for having a hammock. Maybe a little bit of joking, but that's about it.
Gentle ribbing.
Yeah. Cool. Well, any other things that come to mind, or?
No, I was curious what way. Well, so I say no. Did when you mentioned the topic prompt me to remember our conversation with Wolfgang over at Bob's place in Arizona, and a point that he had brought up was the at least based on sort of the limited sample size of he had the students out there and what they were finding. Based on that anecdotal evidence, he was saying, this summer it seems like they were finding far fewer young animals, kind of young of the year or even yearling type animals. And he certainly remarked on the relative lack of gopher snakes. We did see one over the course of time, but just as a relatively, usually pretty abundant animal down there, particularly certain times a year, that it seemed like this year there were fewer young animals that they were finding. Usually we find disproportionately more young animals.
Right.
I know when we talked to Bob Zappalordi, right? He said, well, there's always the young stupid ones. He had a
they'll be out at any time. Yeah.
There's always the dumb ones. Or
the
whatever,
little idiots.
Right. So usually you find a disproportionate number of small ones. And other than that, Big Ben Patchnose, was there really anything else we saw that was...
The Mojave Cross thing, that was a juvenile.
They were probably yearlings.
Probably yearlings. But everything else seemed to be pretty older adults. Or we did see hatchling mud turtle. Or I did. I guess I saw it. Yeah, you guys weren't with me when I saw that one. But it was like the size of a quarter. Like it was very small. Maybe a little larger. But yeah, probably this year's young, just hatched out because the water's hit. Something, I don't know. Yeah, so it just made me, we didn't really even kind of hit on that, but it certainly is, even it's one thing to say a lot of what our discussion was on sort of the consistently seasonal fluctuations and feast and fallow, but there's also just changes over time in terms of what the length of that seasonality, the degree, the harshness of that seasonality. And, certainly how is that affecting the local populations of things, both sort of when we're talking about transitory short scale things, or if there's longer term impacts. And when you say, okay, remodeling this, it's like, well, are we going to model the Canelo Hills Pituophis situation, of this year for over the course of a year? Or are we talking about how many times do you feed them? You still feed them, but how much? Right. Yeah, because obviously nature is brutal, and you have years where there may not be a lot of much reproduction, I mean, I think they said this was the driest or hottest year on record, hottest summer on record in Utah. So, it was not great for herping. I'll tell you that. Like during the summer, for the most part, it was just very dry and there wasn't a lot of things moving. So, that's year to year that could vary.
23 when it was one of the wettest in at least a decade or 20 years or whatever.
So. Yeah. And two, I think about, Shine's lab work with the water pythons, showing that animals born in a good year, it usually had more offspring over the course of their lifetime, lived longer, those kind of things. Like they did better when they had a good head start, lots of food, lots of heat or water or whatever they need, those kind of things. So obviously what year they're born in can maybe get lasting impact on the rest of their lives. They get stunted early on, that could also have an effect of, if you're feeding your hatchlings frequently and they grow quickly, that's probably more going to be beneficial in the long run, within limits, of course. But I think Benson found in his research that they couldn't feed ball pythons too much or something like that. Like,
up until some point or even forever. Yeah.
I don't think, like, at least the snake keeper was not overfeeding their ball pythons. Like they probably could have fed them more. Yeah. There was no correlation of like, okay, you're feeding them too much. They're going downhill in their progress. So some species are just designed to do those kind of things, or maybe their
capacity to
the domestication, process is further along. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah. I'd still say those are only tame, not domesticated.
Right. Well, and I mean, compared to, 20 years ago when you couldn't even hardly keep a ball python alive, let alone reproduce them year after year, at 18 months and on or earlier, like it's crazy. So we've come quite a ways in that regard.
That's a function of both things, right? Some of that is the animals themselves. Some of it is our approach to them.
Yeah.
So it's, there we have, again, compounding factors. It's both sort of our, how they were being approached, who was working with them, how seriously they were taking it, what were their methods. And it is also the animals, right? Anything that's got spider in it, this number of implicit generations and all that, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. Fun stuff to think about and definitely to kind of consider both sides, Yeah. I think the pendulum swinging the way of, more, you have to keep them naturalistic or you're arming them in some way, or those kind of things. And I mean, there may be something to that, but maybe not. Maybe, in our quest to domesticate these things, that's the way it goes. You look at all sorts of domestic animals and what happens as you go down that path, you see, piebalds and, all sorts of different phenotypic changes occurring.
Big eyes, smaller nose, smaller snouts,
floppy ears. Yeah. I mean, that doesn't apply much to reptiles, but,
Those earless lizards, the little flaps are getting...
They're getting huge.
Getting huge, man.
Look at the flaps on that lizard. All right. Well, yeah. Time to move on to more academic thoughts. Anything good herpetologically or herpetoculturally you've seen over the past bit?
Yeah. So, and this will be going after Nipper's heart. When we were staying out at Bob's place, I did get the new Northern Pine Snake book from Joanna and Bob and Michael. So I've been reading through that. That's been really good. And when we were talking to Chuck, your buddy Chuck, at Bob's place, he was engaging Dustin in a conversation around sort of the old school herp authors. We were talking Caulfield, and then kind of it went from there. And he had mentioned Minton, and who's out of Indiana, I think, who was a name that I'm actually not super familiar with. But he's saying, Conant and Caulfield, Conant, Pope. Ditmars, sort of the classic herp writers in that sort of book style. Yeah. And, I said, well, we're writing. And he's, he was basically giving me, that's not a book, but he came to agree. And, but he said Minton. And so, that was a new name for me. And there's I think it's venomous reptiles and maybe it's giant lizards, something like that. But the point is, sure enough, Abe books, books from the 70s for $5 or whatever. And it's so I'm going to check it out. And then it seems like there's a more recent biography or autobiography. I think he's actually I think he deceased in the late 90s, early 2000s. But he was the son of a U.S. senator who then was a congressman who was then a Supreme Court justice, who made him. He said, "Oh, I want to be a herpetologist." He said, "You'll be a doctor or a lawyer and like it, or whatever." So he was a doctor, and kind of in a Richard Ross way, had gone traveled the globe, but was then wound up working with his wife. They were in Pakistan for a handful of years, and so he's heavily associated with the reptiles of Pakistan. So anyway, those are cool. Those books are coming, and future notes and thoughts, I'm sure.
Nice, yeah. No, I picked up the Pine Snake book too. I haven't picked it up to read it yet, but I need to do that. Yeah, exactly. I guess I can say I've been busy writing and hopefully going over Blue Line soon, the kind of the final proof of the book, the field guide to the reptiles and amphibians of Utah. Excited to see that come out. Hopefully they fix it, and it's a beautiful, wonderful book, but we'll see. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting that one out the door. And then I've been writing more on the Asperities book, so it would be nice to wrap that one up together. I know it's kind of been like I don't know. I don't know why I haven't written faster on this one. I think when it was Nick and I writing, we'd kind of spur each other on, like, "Hey, I wrote 10 pages today. How much did you write?" That kind of thing, where, you just don't have the, frequent check-ins and things and talking about, okay, what do you think about this concept? And we just don't have that as frequent with Lucas. And I think that may be part of it, and he's busy and we're busy. And, if it's not on the forefront of your mind, you kind of put it off and forget about it. I'm also working on revamping my, carpet python poster. I kind of want to get some copies printed out for the Carpet Fest and have them down there, but I was not happy with how the inland and the Gammon Ranges carpet python turned out. And so I redid the Gammon Ranges, and I'm in the process of redoing the inland. So I'm sorry if you bought the poster already, but I'm doing a revision of it and also trying to make it a traditional or more common poster size. So if you want to put in a poster frame or something, then it'll be easier to do that. So I'll try to make it like 2x3 or something, so it's more readily available poster frame. Exactly. Yeah. So I know it's kind of a pain sometimes with posters, trying to put them up on the wall or something. I did see kind of a cool idea. It's like a magnetic hanger, and it clips to the top of it and the bottom of it and kind of hangs, so it's just by the weight of the frame, it keeps it straight and nice. So I might try that style out and see how that works. But yeah. Okay. So I don't know, just, that's kind of where my head is getting ready for the Carpet Fest. I actually, when we were at Bob's, I picked up a couple cases of books and sent one with Jordan. So he'll have some of the second edition of the Carpet book at Carpet Fest. So we can, so if you want to, I'm sure you'll be listening to this after Carpet Fest, but maybe, I guess it might come out
Maybe you will have purchased it at Carpet Fest.
But I will have books there, whether or not this is helpful information now when you're listening, because when is now, right? You could be listening to this in 50 years and maybe, hopefully, I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, I counted up. I think we're around 165 episodes or somewhere around there. So keep plugging away, I guess. We'll get to Eric and Owen numbers in another 10 years or whatever, however long they've been going. But yeah.
Yeah, kind of wild. I mean, so the content, and again, so you'll have to check it out to go back and do it, especially since it's not available on Blog Talk anymore. But I'm sure it really hits home for you because, Justin and Nick can't be here to go to Tinley for the book because they're in Australia, and I know that's good and bad. There's plenty of good and bad that comes with that, but like that's got to fix that time in your mind very clearly of how long ago that was,
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. And, it would be fun to listen to some of those older episodes where we're talking about, and see how far we've come.
I think it's Luke again, and then it should be Ben, and then you and Nick. So it should be within, if Eric sticks to the schedule, it should be within the next 4 or 5 weeks.
Right. Yeah, that'll be cool to hear how we used to think, or what,
How you used to think, what you're, the NT Kakadu, what you did, all of that.
Right. 15 years ago. That's a while back, Yeah. Kind of crazy.
The whole thing's, it's kind of wild that you'll be able to listen to it with, as I say, particularly you guys being the guest, that it's like, just the capacity to view back. This is what I thought, this is how I described it. It's really cool.
Yeah. It's pretty fun. I mean, kudos to those guys keeping it going. I mean, it was interesting. Like, I tuned into Carpets and Coffee while I was driving to a work dinner. So I chimed in kind of quick, at a stoplight or whatever. And, listened to it today as well. And, just good to hear those guys talk again, but, kind of hearing some of that, real life from Eric, like he almost threw in the towel, sold off all his snakes and got out of the podcasting business. Is like, oh man, that would be a huge loss. I'm glad he got revitalized and got excited about it again. I mean, obviously there's things that happen in life that just take us out of it, and you may not have energy for reptiles or, podcasting anymore. And we get that, it happens, and there's no shame in, and especially in Eric and Owen's case, like they can turn in the towel and they have a huge record of good things that they did over the past, 15 years that none can match. And, not many can even come close to. So, that's pretty cool. Pretty impressive, guys. I guess it's an honor to be a part of that, to be on the NPR network and consider them friends. That's really a cool thing. So what a good example they've been. It makes me want to keep going and keep putting out some good stuff, but who knows, maybe I'll burn out and I'll be out of here in another 10 episodes. We'll see. Prove me wrong, children.
Prove me wrong.
All right. Well, we'll call it a night, and thanks for listening. We'll catch you again next time for Reptile Fight Club.